That's Debatable is sponsored by MB&G. MB&G is specialists in the esoteric world of vehicle and furniture warranty insurance, delivering quite marvellous customer service, prompt claims payment, and a highly developed understanding of how to deliver these products in a way that is both compliant with the regulations and attractive to customers. To find out more, call Paul Smith, the Managing Director, on 07887 501 441. That's 07887 501 441. Welcome to That's Debatable, the weekly news podcast of the Free Speech Union. Welcome back to all of our listeners. Welcome back to all of our viewers. And those eagle-eyed viewers, will already have spotted that we don't have Ben with us today. Here at Free Speech Towers, it's been so exceptionally busy that Ben has had to go off and help. Well, we've got hundreds of cases open actually at the moment, and Ben is helping with those as we speak. But Jan McVerish, Dr. Jan McVerish, who is our events director, has kindly agreed to step into the breach. And certainly over the next few weeks, and then we're going to see how it goes, aren't we, Jan? We're going to see how these podcasts now work with both me and Jan. So, Jan, welcome to the podcast. I hope you're excited.
I'm very excited, Tom. Thank you for having me.
You're a consummate professional. You've done this many times. I mean, you are responsible, aren't you, for putting on a fantastic agenda and rota of events, which you've now done for at least two and a half years, I think, haven't you? All the Free Speech Union events.
4.5.
Is it 4.5 already? That means you were one of the earliest employees of the Free Speech Union, I think.
I was.
Yeah.
I was.
Yeah. Brilliant.
It shows.
Not at all. Not at all. But happy birthday to you as well, Jan. I know it's been a big weekend.
Thank you.
But we should launch straight into our first item of today. And it is, as I'm sure listeners and viewers will be aware, it's been an absolutely crazy week. There's been so much discussion about what happened to Allison Pearson on Remembrance Day. And I think there have been articles written in the Telegraph pretty much every single day since she broke the story. She went onto TV, she was interviewed. Interestingly, and I'm sure everyone will aware the story, is that she was visited by Essex Police on Remembrance Sunday morning at her home, and they were investigating a tweet that she had sent out and since deleted about a year ago, around about. So it's sort of a fairly long period between the tweet going out and the police arriving at Allison Pearson's door on a Sunday morning, on Remembrance Sunday morning. And there's been a bit of confusion because I think that Allison initially thought this might be a non-crime hate incident. Essex Police have since come back and said, well, actually, no, we are investigating sort of the criminal element of the potential criminal element of that tweet. But what I think it certainly did, Jan, and I think it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on this. It certainly brought out into the open more generally this issue of non-crime hate incidents, which have been, as I think I said earlier last week, they've been a whack-a-mole issue for us at the Free Speech Union. Our first one famously was Harry Miller. And as the week's gone on, all of these other examples of non-crime hate incident have come out of the wash. And we realize that it doesn't feel like we're any closer to kind of controlling the extent of these non-crimes. And the clues in the name, non-crime, how Orwellian can you get? But I wondered what your initial thoughts were on that, Jan.
Yeah, well, it's obviously a huge story, and it's a huge story because it's so important. I mean, I think you can see how it divides people. So I noticed on Newsnight on Friday night, I think it was, or maybe Thursday, there was a discussion about the Allison story, and it was, the top story. But there was such a kind of skepticism about this being an authentic story. And I thought that's so interesting. This so often happens around free speech issues. It's the same in academia as well. There's a whole kind of cohort of people who are just skeptical. about there being any kind of free speech problem. So, whereas on the other side, the NCHI issue really has resonated with a lot of people for a really long time, because as soon as they hear the term non-crime,
Mm.
they just think, well, what on earth are the police doing, having any involvement in that? And people really get it. Why on earth would there be police involvement in a non-crime?
Yeah.
What's it got to do with them if it's just speech? So I think people understand the significance of NCHIs, and they have done for quite a long time, and the kind of awareness is built through lots and lots of cases and stories. And I've found it in the last 6 months or so, when I've met people from other countries. They say, what the hell is going on in Britain? And they say, you've got these non-crime things, haven't you? What on earth is that all about? And they know about it. They know about NCHI. So I think you can really see why, Allison thought that's what was being investigated on the doorstep, because she heard the police have now released the transcript, I think,
Yeah.
giving it to the press. So they say, oh, we didn't say NCHI, but they use the term incident and they use the term offence.
Mm.
And I would think NCHI, because I would already know about NCHI. So the whole thing it's just it can seem comical, and we kind of sometimes laugh at the ridiculousness of these things, but it's also incredibly serious. And I think I said to you last week that, if I had a knock at the door on a Sunday morning at 9:40 in the morning, like Alison did, I've got young sons, or youngish, and I would absolutely fear the worst if I saw the police at my door. So the idea that they had the absolute insensitivity to go and knock at somebody's door at 9:40 in the morning,
Yeah.
I think is, just shows a sort of a loss of judgment, really. So yeah, we'll see what ends up being the truth of this situation. But I can really appreciate as well for Alison just how disturbing that is, because again, it can seem really silly. It's NCHIs, it's all ridiculous, but actually what's being said here is that she's committed quite a serious criminal offence of incitement to racial hatred.
Yeah.
I mean, to have that looming over you, that's incredibly worrying, I think.
You're completely right about the real life effect of these, both personally in this case, as you say, arriving on a Sunday morning, but also in that the more general instance of these non-crime hate incidents, the fact they can show up on that criminal check. And as a result, you may not get a job, and you may not even have known that you had the non-crime hate incident against your name, which is just bizarre. But also some of the news items that have come through about non-crime hate incidents being recorded against the names of children
Mhm.
in schools for saying the most innocuous things, such as "you smell like fish," or I think that was what one of them was. And
Mm.
you think this is normal playground nonsense. And I don't know whether it's then parents or whether it's teachers who have said we need to get the police involved, and whether there's an inherent fear of the sort of consequences of a situation coming back to bite them if they don't go to the police. There seems to be that in play as well. But one area I thought would be worth just reminding our listeners and our viewers is this new code of conduct. Because interestingly, it does cover off quite a few of these points. But I mean, just on the children issue, Jan, there is in section 36 of the new code of conduct that came out on non-crime hate incidents in the middle of last year. It says incidents in schools. If a report is made to the police about an incident that occurs in a school and does not amount to a crime, the appropriate police response will be to refer the matter to the school management team to offer advice to the complainant about available support. An NCHI record should not be made on policing systems, and the personal data of the subject should not be recorded. And so
Mm.
we get these articles coming out in the press last week about NCHIs that are being recorded. Now, maybe they predate the code. Maybe they predate the code coming out in the middle of last year. I think it initially came out in March, and then it was finally pushed through the College of Policing in the middle of last year. But with these, do the police forces really understand all the elements of the code? Are they applying all the elements of the code? There are so many questions here, I think, that are left
Mm.
hanging.
Well, yes, that's right. And it was very interesting to see that after the Telegraph broke the story of Alison Pearson's case, the Times then had its own investigation that they'd done into this issues of children being recorded. And I've just realised actually that as it happens in schools, they have been monitoring racist incidents for a long time. And one of our members, Adrian Hart, who's very active down in Brighton, he wrote a book a long time called The Myth of Racist Kids. And
Mm.
what he was alerting people to was that in schools, they were keeping these records in primary schools, of children saying things. And one of the incidents he said was of a black child and a white child saying to each other, "You're brown chocolate, you're white chocolate."
Mm.
And both of them were recorded
Wow.
for having said this, even though they weren't upset by having said it was overheard.
No.
And so the fact that schools have already been doing this for 10, 15 years, then of course you can sort of imagine when teachers start to kind of take it even more seriously, the police kind of starts to loom, and that then maybe they then start to think they need to report it to the police. So, and obviously I'm assuming children say much more nasty stuff than that. They probably say genuinely racist stuff, but a school should be handling that, definitely going nowhere near the police.
And
But obviously this loss of any perspective is really worrying.
And that's the key word, isn't it, Jan? Perspective, because there seems to be an unawareness of how children tick. I'm not a parent, but I know enough about the way the playground works. Particularly, there are some children who are more naive than other children. And often the less naive children are very good at manipulating the more naive children. So they can very easily kind of be bullying other children, but also getting them into trouble by kind of
Mm,
manipulating them to say things or put things in a certain way. So you
mm,
never quite know. And I also know that the teachers and the parents often are not aware of all the full facts of what may have happened on the playground between kids when you've got some smart, some manipulative kids versus the more naive kids. So, there are complexities in the playground that I think would get reduced in these
mm,
situations. Exactly the one you said, whether you're using
mm.
the wrong language to
Yeah.
describe things, even though there's no intent of any kind behind it.
Well, and then what we see then is this escalate at a higher level of adult society. The same thing has gone on, which is it looks as though somebody who's a kind of activist has reported Alison to the police
Yeah,
for a tweet, regardless of the fact that she then deleted the tweet pretty quickly
yeah,
um, a year ago. And that because that activist is in the same way that the child goes to the teacher and sort of sneaks on their peer who's engaged in a case of a playground, normal kids conversation. In the case of Twitter, Alison and other people are all engaged in political argument and in civic discourse.
yeah,
On Twitter, and obviously people are also getting reported for things they write in proper journalistic articles as well. So then you've got activists who are then kind of
yeah,
sneaking on the phone to the police. It's very, very Stasi like. And I think that they're back to Harry Miller's case. Um, in his the judgment in his case, the judge said, "We do not have a Stasi and we do not have a checker in this country, and we never have had. What on earth is going on? Basically, this should not be happening."
yeah,
And then, of course, that's what everybody feels like this is, and the what we again is all the sort of more intangible consequence of this is the lessons people learn from the story of Alison Pearson, which is, well, God, I can't afford to have that experience. I really can't, because Alison at the end of the day has got the Telegraph on her side, thankfully, and they're not going to. They're not going to sack her. They've thankfully brought the story to light.
yeah,
Whereas if you're in a normal workplace and the thought of being accused of being a racist, for example, and there being the police involvement as well, I mean that would be devastating,
yeah.
absolutely devastating. So then what do? You just don't say things.
And that's the
It's just
chilling effect,
silence and
isn't it,
protest.
Jan?
Yeah,
We talk about the
yeah,
chilling effect. In working in free speech world, we come up with these things that become
mm,
cliches quickly. And the trouble with the cliche is that the meaning of it seeps away very quickly, and it just becomes sort of a word rhyme that we say. But actually, the chilling effect, this is it. This is it. When people are not saying things, not having the conversations they'd like to say. I think in the piece of work we did earlier this week, we did a survey in the workplace and discovered that 62% in a training environment, so these were people who'd gone through equity training, diversity training, inclusion training, 62% of them were self-censoring. They were either saying things they didn't believe, or they weren't saying things that they did believe. So yeah, it's a real life thing. And by the way, that's a plug, isn't it, for the Free Speech Union, of course, because that's why Toby set it up, was so that all of us ordinary members of the public would have a sort of a shield, as it were, to protect us when things go wrong. Can I just mention one other thing from the code that I think is really important? And that is paragraph 58. I should have been a lawyer, shouldn't I, Jan? I'm loving my paragraphs and my quotes from the Code of Conduct. But again, a positive thing that came in the code is paragraph 58. It says that to the police forces, if a subject's personal data will be processed as part of an NCHI record, in most circumstances, the recording authority should promptly notify the individual of this, which I think is a really big step forward. Again, assuming that qualification isn't being leaned on too heavily, I think that's a really good step forward, that if there is an NCHI logged against an individual name, and then their personal details, i.e. their name and things that can identify them, are being recorded, that person should be told that is happening. And I think our concern has been that they have been going up without people being aware. Now, there is an exception there. There is wiggle room. But I think nevertheless, it's there in black and white in the code. So again, there is lots of positive stuff that came through in this code. But my big concern is the extent to which it's actually sort of propagating through the police forces at the moment. Certainly when we did our data work on the police forces and the freedom of information requests, the data was so variable. Even from the same police force for two different periods of time, the data could vary really considerably. So, the code is there. We just need to make sure that it's actually being upheld.
Yeah, but it's when you get this kind of blurring between the law, which is a very heavy and serious thing when applied to individuals, and there's a kind of threat to their freedom, and this idea of sort of just behaviour people don't like, or words people don't like, and somehow the law can somehow be bent and sort of spread out to deal with those kinds of interpersonal interactions. And you can see why people are very, very confused. They don't really understand what the law is, especially younger people. They don't really understand that the law is a very serious and quite precise thing that is designed to deal with serious matters. And I think people, if people are calling the police over what somebody has said in a tweet, then you can see that people just no longer really understand what the law is. And it may be that younger police officers are also confused about this.
It's going to roll and roll, this issue of non-crime hate incidents. We'll put a link in the show notes to the guidance that we've actually put together for members of the Free Speech Union as to what to do if you suspect you do have an NCHI against your name. But we should move on to talk about Wales, Jan. So this is
the nice link, because Allison Pearson is Welsh.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. So there is a nice link. There you go. Now, I'm sure listeners, viewers will be well aware of the way that Wales and the government of Wales have been pushing, I think they call it a race action equality plan that was passed in the government to make Wales an anti-racist country by 2030, I believe. And part of that, it came out yesterday, or it was reported in the Telegraph, was that the Welsh government has pledged to change the beliefs and behaviour of the white majority in Wales, and essentially make all aspects of public life, in inverted commas, inclusive. And to meet the demands of this plan, public bodies in Wales have launched policies which include potentially destroying statues of old white men that have been deemed offensive. Don't know why they'd be deemed offensive. And official reports have advised creating dog-free areas to boost inclusion. So, I mean, it's this next step isn't it, in re-educating a whole population. This isn't a code of conduct in an employment environment. This is a code of conduct for a whole population, Jan. I mean, what comes to your mind when you read this kind of article in the Telegraph?
Yeah, well, the thing that stood out to me when I looked at the story was that the government is using what they say, this is about behaviour change. And it's
Mm,
really interesting. There's no apology for that. This is explicitly what it's about. It's about behaviour change. And of course, they're using language in order to force us to change our behaviour. So our behaviour really, the behaviour we have to really change is actually to learn when to shut up or
yeah.
what language to use. There's not really any other behaviour. I mean, what else am I going to do?
Or
Not look
dog
at a statue.
walking. Dog walking, I
Well,
suppose.
yeah. I know. Well, I think that's that. I know that was a big headline story, and it lent itself to people kind of ho ho hoing about it. And I was sort of thinking that somebody said, well, God, once people come for the dogs, the Brits aren't gonna tolerate that anymore. They come for the gammons, they come for the Karens. Now they're coming for our dogs. But
That's brilliant.
I
I
think
love
in
that.
way actually when you read what's being proposed, one of the things that was interesting is that it's come out from a committee of some kind called BAME Cymru, but of course BAME as a term is now seen to be outdated in
Mm,
other jurisdictions and in other institutions. They've now said we should move it beyond that. That isn't a good term to use. So you can see how in the attempt to kind of impose new language and ideas and thought policing, you can't possibly keep up because even the institutions themselves can't keep up with themselves. So the whole thing is just, it's very serious. It's silly, but it's also very serious. And so always trying to think about these things. And what are the free speech implications of this?
yeah.
And I think people do instinctively know that there's free speech implications because you end up with all these tripwires of language, which people stumble across, and then they end up potentially punished. But once people learn that the tripwires are there, what they do then is inhibit themselves, and they don't know how to talk about other people. I mean, God, imagine that you don't actually know how to refer to somebody or how to,
Yeah.
just explain that you are concerned about another ethnic group, for example. You may be absolutely sympathetic to the treatment of another ethnic group, but if you don't know how to express that, so you can't actually have a frank conversation, not just one that's antagonistic, but one that's actually sympathetic as well. So I think it's really serious what's going on here.
It's a really important link there, Jan, isn't it? I think it's very tempting, certainly on this podcast. Every week we talk about wokeness and we talk about anti racism and critical race theory, but keeping that line of sight between what those sort of social science, in inverted commas, theories are and how they link to free expression and free speech. That line of sight can easily get blurred.
Mm,
You can sort of go off on a tangent and actually it may be something that's not related to free expression, but at heart, as you say, because it's about control of our language, it really, really does come back to free expression. And what scares me as well with this, Jan, is I think I clipped a little bit of this action plan, some of the definitions in the introduction. I sent it to a friend, and my friend came back and said, whoever wrote this article can't, it's ridiculous. I said, that's not an article. That's a template for a
mm,
country. That's actually a
mm,
blueprint. It's like they've come to the table and they've opened up the map and said, right, this is what we want Wales to look like. It's
mm,
the ambition here of changing language, changing behavior, changing a whole country is really quite terrifying and quite
mm,
chilling.
mm,
And then you
mm,
add to that, I think last week the Prime Minister was in Wales. He was at the conference, the Labour conference in Wales, and he said, "You've forged the way ahead here in Wales. We're well and truly going to come on and match you and come behind you in England and the rest of the United Kingdom." And that really, again, so makes me terrified about
mm,
what's going on out there. And I'm struggling to see where the assent from the population has come from. I know that this is obviously it's a democratically elected government, but I think it's this. So many people go to the ballot box, don't they, about what's in their back pocket, their money, and obviously whether they're going to be able to buy food, the basics of life, and this other stuff this baggage that seems to come with it is not what's necessarily top of people's minds when they go into the ballot box. So
Mm.
it raises all sorts of questions, I think.
Yeah, that's really, and I think the devolution question is really important here, because this is the same thing with Scotland, where these kind of agendas have been taken forward in the devolved authorities. I think because they're sort of thrashing around for a purpose that's specific to the region. This is not specific to Wales. Hate crime law was not specific to Scotland. It's this kind of generic bureaucratic approach to the population, which is essentially evasive. It's about not actually talking to people, because what you're doing is you're saying, well, first of all, before we'll have a conversation with you, we want to make sure you're using the right language, which actually is a kind of muffle or muffler that gets put over the general kind of actual democratic interaction between representatives and people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that description. It's a muffle or a muffler. One next article that I thought we should touch on just briefly, Jan, is this absolutely tragic case of a student in Oxford who was reported this week of having taken his own life, having been essentially excluded by his peers. So, the details of what originally happened aren't really relevant to this conversation. But the outcome of that, the fallout of that, was that he was shunned by his peers and completely ostracized, and ended up taking his own life. And there'd been a couple of great articles talking about this, including one from an Oxbridge student saying, this is a shocking story, but it doesn't surprise me. I have had the same kind of cancel culture happen in my first term at Oxford. This is what the student has written. Someone it wasn't him, but someone else in his year group was accused, or her, accused of racism in the week before the winter holiday. It was vague, it was unsubstantiated, and again, this individual was ostracized. And I also read an article by Professor Kathleen Stock on this case. But I think what I thought really jumps out of these kinds of absolutely tragic stories, Jan, is first of all this idea that cancel culture doesn't exist. Clearly, it's a myth. Our stats show that it's a myth. They really ram that home. But the humanity of this story, again, really shows us that cancel culture is not a myth. It has very, very real life consequences, and obviously in this case, ultimate consequences. It's a tragedy. Cancel culture for us, for our institutions, for our higher education, is a tragedy. And the other thing, Jan, I thought was really important that Professor Kathleen Stott brought out at the end was for us to bear in mind the poisonous effect this actually has on the people who did the ostracizing, when they realized that what they thought they were doing was right, and then they see the consequences of it for someone who had been their friend, and they got to live with that. And she actually sort of at the end of the article reaches out and says, please hold something in your heart for those poor peers who have to live with the fact that all that happened for the rest of their lives. So cancel culture, yes, of course, it first and foremost is a tragedy for the person who is cancelled, but it's also poisonous for the people who do the cancelling. And at some point they're going to wake up and go, my God, was that really me? Was I really involved in that? Was I really on that side? We talk about the right side of history and the wrong side of history. They've got to carry on now. They've got to carry on and kind of work that through. And there are no sort of adults, or culturally we're in such an odd place to help navigate them back to sanity from cancel culture, because it's so infected. Institutions are best institutions like Oxford, like Cambridge, like Durham, and this you know better than anyone, I think, Jan. But I thought it was really interesting article by Professor Stock, and making that point at the end. Cancel culture ruins everybody. There are no winners. It's lose lose.
Yeah, I think that is a brilliant point, and I think although in this case actually it didn't seem to be about speech, it wasn't something that was said by the student. And obviously with suicide, you have to be really careful about drawing the line of causation, because it's very, very difficult to know,
Yeah.
how what's caused somebody to take their life. But what's very familiar and we can understand is the method this method of cancellation and social ostracism, which, for students to be engaging in this at a time when they really need to be as free as possible to learn how to get on with everybody and to interact in a way that genuinely all the joy of freedom, moving out from your family home, being amongst your peer group, meeting new adults who are your lecturers, etc. That ought to be a time where it's free and relatively free of consequences. That's the whole point. It's a kind of period of freedom, of an extended period of maturation, really, into your early 20s, when people, that's kind of the point. That's why we do want people to go to university. But if they're this kind of conduct, which actually is going on in schools as well, and I know that from having kids myself, that especially boys are very susceptible to accusations against them being made, which then result in everybody turning. And I've heard about horrendous stories like that. But it can happen around false accusations, Me Too style accusations.
Yeah.
But it also happens around words and speech. And, again, from sort of, having little glimpses into what 19, 20-year-olds are doing and the way they're conducting themselves, then this idea of them policing themselves incredibly harshly for a misspoken word or a joke or a bit of banter. And there's a real clash between the sexes on this, I think, as well, where girls can be incredibly censorious towards boys, and the rug is pulled under a boy for sort of saying something that he might joke about with boys, but a girl hears, and then they kind of they pile on. And so these kinds of, a lot of the time people talk about internet pylons, but actually there's a real pylons going on, which are devastating. I cannot imagine, having been on a campus, at the age of 20 and making a wrong step or even just speaking your mind, saying the truth, and then everybody just turning their back on you. I mean, it's absolute nightmare scenario. It's a nightmare.
It really is. As you say, I think if there'd been a camera or a voice recorder running when I'd been at university, I think I'd been ostracized many times over. Well, I wasn't, I was just normal. I know that may sound odd, Jan, but this is it. This is normal, as you say. It's normal development. You said that. Moving on swiftly. You had something more light-hearted, I think, you wanted to talk about next, Jan, which is your visit to the theatre. I think we should try and find a name for this segment. So Jan goes out and about in the real world, whereas I'm a data person. I'm stuck in front of my computer, but you're out there. You're in the real world doing real things, Jan.
Yeah, well, for me, because I organise events, having time off is going to other people's events and not having to organise them. So last week I was at a Comedy Unleashed night, which is good fun, and so that sets us up nicely for we've got our own Comedy Unleashed benefit night on Tuesday, the 17th of December. Tickets are available on our website.
I love that evening, Jan. That's one of my favourite evenings of the year.
Fun.
Yeah.
So all members should get to London from wherever they are and come to that. Tickets are available. We've got a lot of tickets. We've sold loads, but we've got a big capacity there. So do come to that. It's really, really good fun. But yes, on Friday night, I went to a performance by a woman called Wendy Houston, who is a very well-established choreographer and dancer. She's been dancing since the 80s. She was part of an kind of alternative dance company called Deviate in the 80s that were kind of, really focused around sort of pushing the boundaries and particularly around issues of kind of sexuality and gay identity and Section 28, kind of campaigning against all those kinds of things through sort of dance and performances. But then recently she has faced cancellation herself for the performances that she wants to put on. And this one in particular is called Watch It. And it's a fantastic, very tightly organised one hour show, purely with Wendy performing. And it just spans sort of stand-up comedy, movement, because she's a dancer and she's kind of now in her, I don't know, I'm guessing she's in her early 60s. I hope I haven't got that wrong, but she's 45. Everything she does is incredibly tightly choreographed kind of movement and gesture. It's really wonderful. And it's sort of structured around this idea of a game show called Watch It, where you've got a 3 strikes and you're out rule. So you say 3 things wrong, and by the end of it, you're totally cancelled.
Wow.
And what she does really cleverly is she just very subtly and in a way that is avoids all the cliches. She manages to address all the issues that we know are really important. So it's about freedom, it's about identity, cultural appropriation, what kinds of, she sort of at one point explores just the only prop is a cloth, and she sort of wraps it around her into a kind of sari and says, well, is this appropriate? Is it appropriation? And then she goes on to movements and gestures and dance moves and says, well, this isn't my move. I've taken it from somebody. I don't own it.
Yeah.
So, and it's really clever. It's so cleverly done. And I think anybody in the audience, no matter where they're coming from, woke or not, they could understand what's being said. And it was interesting being in a small audience on Friday night, where you can hear the kind of recognition building as the evening goes on, especially women at
Hear
sort
the
of my age.
pennies dropping. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a woman next to me, sort of my sort of age, maybe a bit younger, with a teenage daughter, and there was one reference to J.K. Rowling, and Wendy sort of says at some point, says, "Can we talk about J.K. Rowling?" And then that's it, just nothing else. And at that point, the mother kind of just laughs, and the daughter's sort of, I'm not quite sure the daughter's reaction, but you can just tell there's this point of conflict and tension that's been going on for so long for so many people around the sex and gender issue. So, but she's she's really bold as well, Wendy, because she's unafraid to talk about Islamism, and she makes a reference very early on to Salman Rushdie. She talks about how at the end of the 80s things all got a bit beheady, and but she's very, very brave on those kinds of issues, and really fearless. And it's all inspired by an old colleague of hers who was also a dancer and choreographer, Nigel Charnock, who she says was just completely unafraid to say exactly what he thought. And he died a number of years ago. It's a kind of tribute to him. And he was very bold on the question of sort of new blasphemy laws coming in by the back door. So, yeah, it's a very bold performance. It's on in Salford tonight, actually. If people go to our newsletter, they can find details of that. I think there's probably some tickets left, but it's really worth seeing. And I'm hoping at some point it will be videoed and everybody will have a chance to see it, because it's very, very impressive.
This is what the creative arts should all be about, shouldn't it? Pushing back against the tide of whatever cultural mores are right here in front of us, which of course are so terrifying to address at the moment. But when I saw in the notes you'd put this item down, Jan, saying "watch it," I thought that's very good. That's very good marketing, even with the title of a show to entitle it "Watch It," because obviously people should go and watch it.
Yeah, it's very funny and incredibly moving. When I saw it in the summer, and I was laughing my head off at certain jokes, because she's got these what she calls bespoke jokes, because everybody's gets offended by other people laughing at things that they don't find funny. She said, well, now we're in an age of the need for bespoke jokes. Everybody needs an individually tailored joke, which I thought was really, really funny. But then towards the end, when she's kind of silent, she performs the experience of just being reduced to a whisper. And I found that absolutely devastating, because I know so much about the people that have experienced this silencing. And so, yeah, it's fantastic. It's really, really clever.
You persuaded me. I need to find a way to see it.
Get to Salford tonight.
Yeah. You had one final area you wanted to discuss. You were out and about yesterday as well, weren't you?
Oh, yeah.
You were out and about. This is to do with something I think viewers and listeners would be aware of, which is that there was, again, reported in the Telegraph a couple of weeks ago now, I think. This is the case of a young female footballer with suspected autism. She was hit with a 6-match ban after asking a bearded transgender opponent, "Are you a man?" And obviously, this has led to outrage amongst people, among particularly women who want to play football, who are scared about women footballers being hurt on the pitch, and the fact that the regulator, the FA, has actually come down on the side of, well, I would say craziness in saying that just asking those questions is enough to get a 6-match ban. But you were out and about on this issue yesterday. Is that right, Jan?
Yeah, well, rather brilliantly, a group called 1205, and I haven't got time to explain why they called that, a new group. They organised this in response to that particular case, and they went to the England-Ireland match was happening at Wembley yesterday, and so they kind of stationed themselves on the main walkway up to the stadium, and there was a big kind of protest with loads of men and women, actually, with banners saying "Save Women's Sport," with people on megaphones. But then loads of others of us were just out there talking to people as they walked up to the stadium, handing out leaflets. And I was there, not entirely in my FSU hat. So in my personal capacity, the fact that this issue drives me completely raving bonkers. So I have to go and do something to contain my anger at the story of this girl, which I just think is so appalling. But it was, organised in response to that. And you know what was so amazing? Because there's thousands of people. So it was great to go and access so many people and talk to them about the issue as they were going by. Is that initially lots of the blokes, you could see them seeing, what looked like a women's issue kind of a protest taking place, and you can see some of them just kind of thought, oh god, women are moaning again, women are having a go at men again, because it's sort of saying, keep men out of women's sports. And I think some of them thought it was about women footballers' wages and recognition for women's sport, and it wasn't about any of those things. And then as soon as you said to them, do you realise that if you decided tomorrow that you were a woman, you'd be able to play in a women's football team? And they'd immediately go, well, that's completely wrong.
No.
I don't agree with that at all. Every single bloke I spoke to, all ages, were just completely, it's a total no-brainer. And it was really lovely, actually, to have those interactions. And I know a lot of the kind of campaigners just found it fantastic to have those conversations, because we know that's the case. And so there were guys there who were like football coaches of girls' football teams. And everybody knows, that you can't say this kind of thing in certain settings, but it's very clear that men are talking about this, actually. And so that was really clear to me when I spoke to, loads of these guys, and they would say, oh yeah, it's like that dance player. Oh yeah, it's like those boxers. And so they know that this is going on, and they're talking about it in the pub or wherever it is. They feel quite free, actually, to discuss this and to form a strong opinion, which is, this is ridiculous. It's not complicated. Whereas what was very noticeable is younger women wouldn't talk to us. And there was a few instances where there were young women with their boyfriends or husbands, and they'd pull the guy away, and he'd be sort of saying, oh yeah, no, I agree with you. And then the women would almost look like, it's like a self-imposed kind of purdah almost. It's really extraordinary. And I think there's definitely a generation gap amongst women, because older women would stop and talk, and then these younger women just, they've sort of absorbed the be kind or whatever it is, and they've silenced themselves, and they've sort of almost not thinking about it. Whereas the guys, there's a degree of freedom to discuss this issue, which I thought was very encouraging. We just need to tap into that an awful lot more, I think. And when they're free to talk about it, they can try and work out the rights and wrongs.
There's a very brave, it takes a very brave, particularly as you say, young woman, to stand up in that generation and go against that tide. We were going to have an interview with I can't remember her name, but so one fairly prominent, a very young woman who's been willing to speak out and say what the elder, what those of our generation are much more comfortable saying, because we just see that it is madness. But you're right, it's odd the way that it's turned out. But we will have that regular segment, I think, Jan. You out and about doing things in the real world. I think it's brilliant. But what a fantastic first episode to have with you as co-hosting the podcast, Jan. Thank you very much indeed. I hope you've had fun in your first outing.
Yes, I'm in, not out.
You're in,
but yes.
Exactly.
All good fun.
But we will speak to everyone in a week's time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and have a great week full of free expression. But bye-bye for now.